When we come from breakfast, Dad said, look out there, and he said, what can you see? That was the Irish coast we was on.
About 15 miles away, U-boat 20 is running on the surface when a lookout spots 4 funnels on the horizon. Though he has no hope of catching this unidentified liner, Captain Schwieger gives the order to submerge. At almost the same moment on the bridge of the Lusitania, Captain Turner orders a turn to starboard toward Liverpool and puts his ship directly in the path of the onrushing submarine.
Indeed. Excellent. I want a 4-point fix on the lighthouse, please, Mr. Vesting.
Sir.
Steer south, 87 east.
Sir. South, 87 east.
South 87 east, sir.
Captain Schwieger cannot believe his luck. It is just after 2 o'clock. In the Lusitania's dining room, second lunch is being served. The Lusitania is 1,000 meters away from the U-boat and closing fast. At 700 meters, Captain Schwieger gives the order to fire 1 torpedo.
We were at lunch, and this girl who shared the cabin with me, she thought we should be starting to pack. So, of course, I left the table and went with her to the cabin. And we were just inside when there was this noise.
A terrific explosion. A terrific one. And it sounds as if it was right near too. It frightened the life out of me.
Lifeboats went up and down, and they were out of order because they couldn't run. They were all crooked. So they had just to fill the boat and lowered it down by hand, and then when they got to the water, they cut the rope. And of course, the first two overturned, and the people were thrown in the water.
pushing, shoving to get them as high as they could, getting near the back.
to an open space, got my hands in prayer, and I said, please God save us, please God save us.
Get into the lifeboat. An officer came and grabbed me. He said, you can't go in, that's full. And I said, I must. My boy is in there. I just put my boy there. I must. And I got myself free from him. And they were lowering the lifeboat. And I jumped. this hand, it was this hand. Lasted till I was 19 or 20 years old. Still, that's extraordinary. I still could feel the grip.
Gradually, the bows went down, and as the bows went down, the stern came up, until the propellers were out of the water, so it was quite clear of the water. And at an angle, I would think, of about 45 degrees, she said poise, and then as if just on the slide, she slowly slid down, quite dramatically, below the waves. The sea was boiling, and the liner disappeared.
"300 feet below the surface, the great ship came to rest. Inside her were those who had never even made it to the decks. When the power failed and plunged the ship into darkness, they were trapped in the boiler rooms, the cargo holds, the second-class cabins, the first-class elevators. A hatch door still stands open, a last desperate effort to escape as the ship went down. Off to one side, part of a woman's shoe. "300 feet above the liner, death is assuming a different form. Scattered in a great swath that runs for a mile, those who survived the sinking itself are beginning to die from exposure in the frigid sea."
When I came up, there was nothing in sight at all. The boat was disappeared, and all I could see was heads bobbing up and down, and chairs, tables, and things like that, and people calling out. And these two men were on a lifeboat upside down, two of them, and they dragged me on with them.
I know I was in the water and crying and being picked up. Just think there were only 7 lifeboats, but they grabbed me. And it was Mr. Hook that pulled me out.